Sons of Abraham 1, Adam crafted. It is now 2594, fifth slave of the second dusk. The god Yahweh, who is also called Allah, had grown tired of actually existing mortality. He looked at the disasters of the ancient elves and their sacrilege, at the other races' inability to physically or psychologically overcome them, and turned to make his own race. He first experimented by breathing life into that new plane, the Elementos, and created the Jinn. He wanted to create mortals, but that time had passed. Gods could no longer create the numbers to constitute a race, for those niches were full. So instead, he fashioned 3 new beings. Originally, he had crafted just 2 beings, Lilith and Adam. He placed them in the Garden of Eden, near the Fountain of Youth, near Mimir's Well, in the Rosastan. They were neither human or elf, and each were perhaps their own race. Azazel was sent to act as Lilith's soul, and the Archangel Michael was sent to occupy Adam's soul. The 2 were hermaphroditic, but it was as if the spirit of masculinity took over Adam, and the spirit of femininity took over Lilith. Adam and Lilith eventually had a falling out, and Jehovah casted Lilith out of Eden. From Adam's rib, he created a companion called Eve, and sent a Houri to act as her soul. Eve was to be subservient and obey Adam, who was to teach her the ways of the world, as she was born of him and then wed to him. Thus, Adam became male, and Eve became female. Now, Samael, venom of God, the only angel of that God who was both brave enough and free enough to criticize his father, was furious at this decision. In his opinion, this had come about since Adam, the tattletale, had complained first. He viewed Yahweh's creations as a mistake, as weak. These petty creatures proved Yahweh was correct in his original apathy towards mortality. So, he granted Lilith immortality and took her on as his wife. But Yahweh would hear none of this. To him, this was a marked improvement from his experiments with the Jinn. Making a mortal race was not some impulse, but the final note of an imperfect cadence. It was then that Samael thought of a beautiful rhyme. He recalled the story of the third and current chief of the gods. Meliktas was once an angel of a god whose name no esotericist seems to recall. His lord brought him to the Rosastan, and placed him before the gods. This lady, demanded that he bow before mortality, but Meliktas refused. The gods were shocked and moved to anathemize this angel, but Meliktas' creator rebuked them and said he alone succeeded. He would only bow to the gods, and he was praised. It was not fitting for the higher thing, angels of heaven, to bow before the lower thing, beings of earthly planes, though it is seemly for angels to act for the gods in this earthly plane. He rewarded Meliktas and raised him to godhood. So instead of criticizing his liege, Samael congratulated Yahweh on his best of creations, and advised Allah to make a feast in Eden of all his creatures, celebrating his great ones. Samael made sure that the jinn Iblis, well known for being proud of his piety, would attend. Hashem told all his followers to bow before this new creation. Footnote on Hashem. Hashem means the name, and it is commonly used by those who want to avoid saying Yahweh. End footnote. Iblis was either too prideful to follow this direct order, or perhaps he thought this was a test, that one should bow to Yahweh alone, that Yahweh was testing to see who really listened and who believed in that order. Yahweh asked, quote, "Why would I command you not to follow my commandments?" End quote. But the 99 have been known to do just this, calling it abrogation, calling it a test of faith. Yahweh smited Iblis, but did not kill him or excommunicate him. Esotericists believe that this confirms their theory, deduced from a different, but perhaps somewhat similar, figure. Whoever doesn't learn monotheism from Satan is a heretic. Be obsessed with your God. Think only of your God. Lose your status and reputation before you share anything that belongs to your God with any other. Be defined by your God, even if the definition is repudiation. Adam and Eve did not yet have sex, but both experimented with reproduction. They produced that which was not yet sperm or menstrual blood, but things unique to these beings. They buried these seeds in jars and set them down the river. Adam's jar was discovered and found by a Rosastani warlord. From it came the being known as Shahid ibn Jar. The warlord saw this as a great omen. He raised this child and brought him to the forefront. Soon, Shahid took over the island, the first of the 3 men who managed to do this. Shahid either fathered or conquered every ancestor of the Rosastani. Now, either out of spite towards Yahweh, or because he was secretly commanded to by Samael, or Allah, the jinn Iblis took the form of a snake. He convinced Eve to eat the forbidden fruit of knowledge, which some say to be of evil, others of carnal, and a few of gnosis. She had taken it to Adam, and the two created a most ferocious beast of 2 backs. When Allah had found out about the loss of their childlike naivety, he banished them from his realms and cursed them to wander the planet Cristo. He feared that they would drink from Mimir's well and of the fountain of youth. If Adam and Eve were to do this, they, like so many of this age, would come to know the power to overthrow the 99. Adam's line was thus cursed with original sin. One may wash it off through Allah's original forgiveness, but it still passes on, and it still allows you to disobey Hashem. The sin is like a disease whose symptoms are suppressed, but which led to complications that have their own life, and is nevertheless contagious. But if this original sin is the capacity for the Adamic line to disobey Al-Ghafar, in contrast to, say, Lilith's, then how was it possible for Adam to disobey his God in the first place, to eat of the pomegranate at all? Or is it that they could avoid major sins, and this was a mere mistake? Perhaps their punishment was that Yahweh would no longer intervene, but would later restore a few by giving him his grace. That is, he deprived them and their descendants from the grace of his Spirit, but later allowed some to reattain it. That is what some have argued. Others have denied any such concept. They think their nature wasn't changed. They were simply no longer in Eden. Some have blamed Eve. Others have forgiven her, stating it was Adam's fault, as he was her guardian, both to blame her or to exonerate her by proclaiming her childlike innocence, not in terms of guilt, but in terms of incapacity to feel the weight of her sin, is profoundly sexist. The sons of Adam were not great kings. How could they be? Only 4 realms remained free of ancient elven domination: Mora, Sinai, Atlantis, and the Rosastan. Adam wanted nothing to do with the first 2, and his exile forbade him from the latter 2. The only way to live without being caught up in the grotesque world of the ancient elves was to live away and with your head down. Thus, Adam and his inheritors lived a quiet life of pastoralism, away from the hustle and bustle. They devoted themselves to a very esoteric study of religion, which they hoped one day the world would be ready to see and hear. In the meantime, they kept it secret and they kept it safe, passing the knowledge on from father to eldest son and to no one else. The first of these sons were of course Cain and Abel, who Adam called to be a farmer and a shepherd. Abel had always been the more intelligent of the 2, and Adam rewarded him with an easier workload and higher gnosis. But all Cain saw was his younger brother, who spent many nights away from home, stealing his birthright. Cain grew jealous and not only murdered his brother, but pleaded ignorance to Yahweh about it. Footnote on murdered his brother. It is said that the ground itself opened its mouth to swallow the blood and to hide this crime. End footnote. When Allah had discovered the truth, furious Yahweh cursed Cain and marked him. He was doomed to wander the world till the end of time. The ancient elves were impressed with his story and taught him the secrets of the lay, and he found himself drawn to the land of Nod. Here, in this land located on the westernmost tendril of Mora, Cain lives all manners of life, from king to beggar, thief to soldier. Sometimes he hides his identity, sometimes he proudly displays it. Cain nowadays desires to die. He is not depressed or suicidal, he merely desires to move on. Cain feels no guilt for the murder of his only brother, for he points out that Abel was no saint himself. Indeed, Abel now resides in Naraka. Evidently, not just any type of person is murdered by their own brother. Cain wanders the whole world, seeking to relieve himself through some ritual or some redemption. He fervently believes that the secret to his death is tied to his mysterious longing for the land of Nod. Adam and Eve gave their poor son the proper funerary rites. They soon replaced both with Seth, who, to Adam's joy, was much more pious and meditative than his brothers. Seth was given priesthood and knowledge, for example, the letters, and he passed it on to his son, and so on to Enoch. Enoch was born 3216, fifth slave of the second dusk, 492 years after Abel was murdered. When Enoch was 65 years old, he begot Methuselah. After he begot Methuselah, Enoch walked with Yahweh for 300 years, and he had other sons and daughters. The whole lifetime of Enoch was 365 years. Enoch walked with Yahweh, and he was no longer here, for Yahweh took him. Enoch was made an Empyrean and became the chamberlain of Yahweh, who is also called Allah. He took on the name and personality of Metatron. Metatron was already special among his Empyrean brethren in that he had never died, but Yahweh took it further. Metatron had no need to bathe himself in the lith, for Enoch had no past sins that needed wiping. Whatever Yahweh commanded, Enoch, now Metatron, would do, and he always did it of his own accord. Eventually, the same would happen to Elijah, who would become Sandalphon, who would act as his twin. Reader's note: at this point in his presentation, Tom K. flashed a depiction of Enoch as Metatron into the minds of his audience. Enoch was taken to Shemayim, Yahweh's abode in heaven, which is also called Jannah. He was a key witness for Yahweh during the blood flood, and it was on his advice that Yahweh decided who to save and who to leave behind. Enoch felt what it meant to become an Empyrean, and he was first greatly enlarged. Then he grew 72 wings, 36 on each side, and he grew 365 eyes, each like a sun. Finally, his flesh was turned into something like flame, his veins to fire, his eyelashes to heaven's lightning, and his eyes to flaming torches. Thus he became Metatron. Yahweh made Enoch his scribe and his vice-regent. He proclaimed that, quote, any angel who has anything to say in my presence should go before him and speak to him, end quote. Yahweh then crowned him and bestowed upon him the title Lesser YHWH. Al-Lut, Al-Uzzah, and Manat, the Nephilim daughters of Yahweh, protested. They did not want this for themselves. They wanted none to have such authority, let alone a mortal. Quote, did Samael not say not to create Adam, end quote, they demanded. Thus, Yahweh first grew disillusioned with his daughters and declared, quote, I have made and I will bear. Yea, I will carry and will deliver. What are ye, that ye enter and speak in my presence? I delight in this one more than in all of you, and hence he shall be a prince and a ruler over you in the highest palace. End quote. Metatron now serves as the defense attorney for Israel, while Samael sits as the prosecutor before Yahweh, the judge of these secret trials. Towards the end of the Fourth Age, I say that there will be a great Jewish scholar named Elisha ben Abuya, a plain weaver. He will walk through the 7 palaces of Shemayim, each built within the other. He will come before Metatron sitting on Yahweh's throne, and he shall conclude that there are 2 powers in Shemayim. Thus he shall become a heretic. Footnote: yet he will be such a great man that one could still learn from him before, and maybe even a little after. End footnote. So, Yahweh, perhaps still smarting from his daughter's rebuke, will order the angel Anael to beat Metatron with 60 lashes. A lesson to be drawn. If the worst thing you can do is make yourself equal to God, even if only by mistake, then you probably don't want to rebel. Metatron cults are still very prominent, so many rabbis will emphasize those moments in his life when Enoch could be said to have behaved less than righteously. Cain had his own children. In fact, the mystics read the Torah and see that the generations of Seth and the generations of Cain are the same. Some have gone so far as to say that Seth is merely thought to be the father of all mortality, spiritually prefigured by Shahid, and that Cain is the ancestor of Abraham. We further find ourselves perplexed by the fact that the rites and rituals of the priestly line, passed down from father to eldest son, seems to be so similar to the king's list that Oannes would later revive. For example, Enoch's story feels so similar to that of his contemporary Enmenduranki. Enmenduranki had the title King of Sumer, and like Enoch, he was the seventh in his line. Furthermore, he was also brought to heaven before death, and turned into an Empyrean without bathing in Lith. Cain and his line are instrumental to history. Cain had helped us discover the calendar and invented the systems of measurements we now employ. Cain's grandson's son was named Lamech. Lamech took up 2 wives. One was an Adeshni, for whom he sired Naamah, and Tubal-Cain. Footnote on 2 wives. He was the first of Adam's line to practice polygamy, in fact. End footnote. Naamah would factor in the fight at Jericho. Tubal-Cain would come out of occultation, and would be instrumental when Catalhoyek gives the world the secret of copper. With another, Lamech sired Jabal and Jubal. Jabal wandered the lands and showed the people of the Third Age how to make tents, and when Althumbla gave of her children, he discovered some of the first pastoralist techniques. Footnote on discovered. Perhaps one should say rediscovered. There will be several firsts in the Third Age. End footnote. Jubal invented song. This was a mighty deed indeed, not simply because the song had that bardic magic, but also because its rhythm made it the perfect oral transmitter to instruct those illiterates of the Third Age on how to work an algorithm.